Your hips tighten when you lower yourself toward the ground. The range disappeared so gradually you stopped noticing when it left. A few degrees per decade, a slight hesitation becoming a restriction, becoming an impossibility. A 3-year-old drops into a full squat with heels flat on the ground and stays there for the length of a meal. The 3-year-old has not trained for this. You have not been injured. The difference is not damage. It is absence. Decades without sending the hip capsule the mechanical signal it requires to maintain the range the squat provides. That distinction between damage and absence is the physics nobody explains about the body after 50. The stiffness in the hips, the weakness in the grip, the rounding of the upper back, the balance that deteriorated so gradually it felt like a natural timeline. Each of these is treated as aging, the inevitable arithmetic of years on tissue. Each of them is actually signal deprivation, a specific mechanical input. The body was designed to receive daily and has not received in decades. The human body does not maintain itself automatically. It maintains itself in response to mechanical signals, cellular mechanotransduction, mechanical force in, biochemical maintenance response out. Without the force, the maintenance does not run. Evolutionary mismatch between the mechanical environment the body evolved in and the mechanical environment it now inhabits is the central insight. As Lieberman argued and exercised, the body did not evolve to exercise. It evolved to be physically active as a condition of survival. Exercise is a modern invention to replace the movement that daily life no longer provides. For 3 million years, no human chose to squat. They squatted because there were no chairs. No human chose to carry. They carried because there were no wheels. No human chose to hang or climb. They hung and climbed because the environment demanded it. The 7 movements were not a fitness program. They were the mechanical cost of being alive. The body's maintenance systems calibrated to that cost. And when the cost was eliminated by chairs, lifts, wheels, and cushioned shoes, the maintenance systems lost the signals they were calibrated to receive. For 3 million years, daily life provided 7 distinct mechanical signals through 7 movement patterns. The body performed without thinking about them: walking, squatting, hanging, carrying, sprinting, climbing, and resting on the ground. The body's tissues evolved to require all 7, the way the lungs require breaths or the heart requires beats, not optional inputs, operating signals. Modern life eliminated 5 of the 7 within a single century. The body received 2 signals and adapted to the 2 it was given. The adaptation looks like aging. The physics says it is obedience. But mechanotransduction does not respond to load generically. And this is the dimension no prior discussion in this series has reached. It responds to specific load vectors through different receptor configurations in different tissues. Bone remodels along lines of compressive force through osteocyte signaling, but only along the exact lines the force travels. A femur loaded vertically through walking deposits mineral along its vertical axis, while the horizontal trabeculi that resist lateral force receive no signal, and thin. Cartilage feeds through cyclical compression, driving fluid into the matrix, and the zones that never receive compression never receive nutrition. Fascia reorganizes along lines of tensile stress. The vector the tension follows gets remodeled. The perpendicular fibers are left disordered and brittle. Muscle is even more specific. It synthesizes protein only in the motor units recruited by that particular demand, leaving neighboring fibers untouched. Each tissue requires its own specific mechanical input to maintain itself, and the input must arrive along the correct vector, at adequate magnitude, through the range that engages the tissue the vector targets. The hip you are sitting on, the shoulder you reached overhead with this morning, the grip that opened the door, each contains tissue waiting for a specific signal that your daily routine may or may not provide. Bed rest demonstrates the principle at catastrophic speed. Hospitalized patients on complete bed rest lose 1 to 3% of muscle mass per day. Bone density drops within 2 weeks. Joint cartilage thins as imbibition ceases. Every clinician knows bed rest is devastating because the decline is fast enough to see. If you walk daily but never squat, never hang, never carry, never sprint, never climb, you have not removed all 7 signals, but for the 5 absent vectors, the mechanotransduction physics is identical to bed rest: 0 input, 0 maintenance, progressive tissue loss. The difference is speed alone. Bed rest produces visible decline in days. Selective deprivation produces identical decline over decades, slow enough that nobody connects the tissue loss to the missing signal. This is why walking alone cannot maintain a body built for 7 movement patterns. Walking delivers one load vector, cyclical compression, through the lower limbs in the sagittal plane. The hip cartilage that feeds through end-range compression in the squat receives no signal from walking's partial range loading. The latissimus that maintains thoracic extension through vertical pulling receives no signal from walking's horizontal movement. The fascia that remodels along diagonal tension lines during a loaded carry receives no signal from unloaded walking's linear gait. Body does not need more movement. It needs movement variety, different force vectors activating different mechanotransduction pathways in different tissues. 7 movements provided 7 distinct vectors. 7 movements provided 7 distinct vectors. Losing 5 did not reduce maintenance by 70%. Well, the squat, because what the hip joint has been missing for 50 years is not exercise but nutrition. Deep squat takes the hip to its end range of flexion, the femoral head rotating deeply into the acetabulum, the joint capsule stretched to its maximum length, the articular cartilage surfaces compressed at maximum contact area. Cartilage lining the hip joint has no blood supply. It is avascular, one of the only tissues in the body that must receive nutrition through an alternative route. That route is imbibition, the compression-driven fluid exchange the walking discussion described, where cyclical loading pumps synovial fluid into and out of the cartilage matrix, as Sophia Fox and colleagues documented in Sports Health. Walking provides partial range compression. The hip moves through approximately 30 degrees of its available 120-degree range. The cartilage surfaces that contact during walking receive imbibition. The surfaces that contact only at end range, deep flexion, the range the squat provides, receive imbibition only during deep squatting. A body that walks but never squats is feeding roughly a quarter of its hip cartilage and starving the rest, for 50 years. Synovial fluid in the hip is thixotropic, and a deep squat shears it through the full range that walking's narrow band leaves gelled. The morning stiffness that feels like arthritis may be thixotropy that nobody sheared, a mechanical problem with a mechanical solution. If your hips have stiffened progressively through your 40s and 50s, if you have been told this is osteoarthritis, wear and tear, the natural timeline, your hip joint's end-range cartilage may have been nutritionally deprived for decades because the compression signal imbibition requires stopped arriving when chairs replace squatting. Every population that retains the deep squat into old age maintains hip range, knee range, and ankle dorsiflexion that Western populations lose by 50. Hadza hunter-gatherers spend an average of 9 to 10 hours per day in non-ambulatory postures. As Reichland and colleagues documented through direct accelerometry and PNAS, much of it in the deep squat or cross-legged ground sitting. Their hip joints receive the end-range signal daily. Their cartilage receives imbibition across its full surface. Their thixotropic synovial fluid is sheared through its complete range every morning before Western adults have finished sitting in a chair eating breakfast. The Hadza are not athletes. They are not performing exercise. They are sitting, but sitting in a posture that sends the hip its full maintenance signal, while the Western chair sends a signal that covers 30 degrees of a 120-degree range and leaves the remaining 90 degrees nutritionally dark. Your hip is underfed, starved of the compression signal that imbibition requires. And then, the carry, because grip strength predicts mortality more accurately than blood pressure, and the physics of Y runs through 15 muscle groups in a single diagonal chain. Grip strength predicted cardiovascular mortality and all-cause mortality more strongly than systolic blood pressure, as Leong and colleagues demonstrated in The Lancet in 2015. More predictive than cholesterol, blood glucose, or any single biomarker clinicians routinely measure. The reason is, not that a strong grip prevents heart attacks. The grip is the gateway measurement of a whole-body mechanical system that extends from the fingers to the opposite foot. When your hand grips a load, a bag of groceries, a suitcase, a bucket of water, the forearm flexors generate force that transmits upward, through the wrist extensor stabilizing against flexion, through the biceps and brachiali stabilizing the elbow, through the rotator cuff anchoring the humeral head in the glenoid under downward traction, through the trapezius and rhomboid stabilizing the scapula against the thoracic wall, through the contralateral quadratus lumborum preventing lateral trunk flexion, and into the ground to the opposite leg's hip and ankle stabilizers. One grip activates a diagonal kinetic chain spanning the entire body. Grip strength predicts mortality because it reflects how much mechanical load this entire chain receives. Strong grip means the chain has been loaded, groceries carried from the car, tools lifted in the garden, grandchildren picked up from the floor. The carry sends the mechanotransduction signal through every link simultaneously. Bone density in the wrist, the spine, the hip, all receiving loading through a single functional movement. Muscle mass in the forearm, the shoulder, the core, all receiving the synthesis signal through a chain. No gym machine replicates because no machine loads the body diagonally from one hand through the contralateral hip to the opposite foot. The carry is the only movement in daily life that loads the body through a diagonal spanning its entire length. Isolation exercises load individual muscles. The carry loads the architecture that connects them. And it is that architecture, not any individual muscle, that the Liang data says predicts survival. Ancestral humans carried loads daily: water, firewood, game, children, tools. The carry was transport, a mechanical byproduct of daily function that loaded every link in the chain from grip to ground, with every trip to the water source, every haul of firewood back to camp, every child lifted and carried on the hip for miles. The full chain mechanotransduction signal arrived without anyone choosing to exercise. The modern adult who drives to the shop, loads bags into a trolley, wheels the trolley to the car, and drives the bags to the kitchen counter has eliminated the carry from a process that once required it. The kinetic chain receives no load. The grip weakens. You now know what the squat delivers to cartilage and what the carry delivers to the full kinetic chain. The question changes from what individual movements cost individual tissues to the force vector that disappeared so completely most adults over 50 have not experienced it in decades. If your grip has weakened, if jars are harder to open, if you shift heavy bags to the other hand sooner, if you avoid carrying things you once lifted without thinking, the weakening extends far beyond the hand. The grip is the first visible measurement of a whole body chain that has been losing its mechanical input for decades. My grocery bags come home in both hands now, shorter distances, held closer to the body, every meter on foot instead of in the trolley, not heavier bags, ordinary bags carried deliberately, because every meter of loaded walking is a maintenance signal. The 15 muscle chain downstream of the grip requires, and the trolley was silently eliminating. A single test captures the 7 movement principle in one assessment. The sitting rising test, the ability to lower yourself to the ground and stand back up without using your hands, knees, or any external support, predicted all-cause mortality with striking accuracy, as Deprivation and colleagues reported in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology in 2012. Each point lost on the 0 to 10 scoring scale was associated with a 21% increase in mortality risk. The test does not measure fitness. It does not measure strength in any single muscle group. It measures how many of the 7 movement patterns your body has retained: the squat depth to descend, the hip range to fold, the core stability to control the transition, the lower limb strength to rise, the proprioceptive confidence to perform the sequence without grabbing for support. A body that retained all 7 passes without thinking. A body that retained only walking and sitting cannot get down and cannot get up. And the 21% mortality increase per point lost tells you exactly what the missing patterns cost. Well, the climb. Because one force vector disappeared so completely from modern life that most adults over 50 have not experienced it in decades. Every common modern movement pushes or moves forward. Walking pushes backward against the ground. Cycling pushes downward on pedals. Lifting pushes upward against gravity. Opening a door pushes or pulls horizontally. The body generates force in these directions thousands of times per day. One direction is entirely absent: the vertical pull, pulling the body upward against gravity using the arms. Latissimus dorsi, the widest muscle in the body, originating from the pelvis and lower thoracic spine and inserting on the upper humerus, is the primary pulling muscle. In a body that climbs, the latissimus maintains tonic strength that actively resists thoracic kyphosis, the forward rounding of the upper back. The latissimus pulls the thoracic spine into extension from behind. Without the climbing signal, the latissimus weakens across decades. Its tonic pull on the thoracic spine diminishes. The kyphosis that develops through the 40s and 50s is partly a latissimus that stopped receiving the activation signal climbing provided daily for 3 million years. If you catch yourself rounding forward at the desk, straightening when you notice, then rounding again within minutes, the muscles that should hold you upright are the muscles that climbing maintained. The demand disappeared. The strength followed. Shoulder capsule during a climb receives overhead end range loading. The arm above the head, the supraspinatus tendon passing through the subacromial space at its widest clearance. If your shoulder aches when reaching overhead, the sharp catch when lifting something from a high shelf, the restriction when raising an arm to wave, your subacromial space has narrowed because the overhead position that maintained its clearance has been absent for decades. The impingement is treated as pathology. The physics says it is range loss from signal deprivation, an identical mechanism to the hip, different joint, different vector, identical principle. The supraspinatus tendon needs the space to be maintained through regular overhead loading. Without the climb or the hang, without any daily reason to raise the arms above the head, the space narrows incrementally across years. Connective tissue shortens, capsular adhesions form, the acromion remodels slightly downward, until the tendon that once passed freely begins catching on the narrowed architecture. The shoulder that developed impingement at 58 was a shoulder that stopped receiving its overhead maintenance signal at roughly age 12. The last time climbing was part of daily movement. Hanging from a bar, even a passive hang, feet on the ground, partial body weight through the hands, delivers axial traction through the entire spine. Every intervertebral disc is gently decompressed. The shoulder capsule receives end-range loading, the latissimus activates under stretch, and the grip receives sustained isometric load. 30 seconds of hanging delivers a mechanical signal to the shoulder, the spine, and the grip that no other movement in modern life provides, because no other movement pulls the body upward against gravity through the arms. For adults over 55, partial hangs deliver the identical vector at graduated intensity, feet on the ground, hands gripping a bar or door frame, body weight distributed between arms and legs. Even a passive lean hang provides a spinal traction signal the vertebral column has not received since approximately age 8, the last time you hung from anything. Now, the full pattern, because the 3 movements above are proof cases for a principle that extends across all 7 movement patterns: walk, squat, hang, carry, sprint, climb, and rest on the ground. For 3 million years, every human body received all 7 as daily operating signals. Walking remains. Though on flat surfaces, in cushioned shoes, it delivers a fraction of the mechanotransduction signal that barefoot walking on variable terrain provided, as the sensory deprivation the barefoot discussion described. The walking signal is real but narrow, 1 vector, 1 plane, 1 partial range. Stair climbing remains occasionally. The other 5 have functionally disappeared from most Western adult lives. Sprinting maintains the tissue most directly responsible for preventing the falls that kill adults over 65, type 2 fast twitch fibers, the fibers that generate the explosive power to catch a stumble before it becomes a fall. These fibers atrophy fastest with age and receive no recruitment signal from walking, which operates entirely below the threshold that activates them. A 10-second sprint. Anything that briefly crosses the aerobic threshold sends the synthesis signal that prevents their loss. 10 seconds, twice per week. Sprint does not mean track velocity. A hill at maximum effort, rapid stair climbing, a cycling burst all cross the threshold. The fibers do not care about the movement. They care about the intensity. If you have not sprinted in years, if the idea feels reckless, inappropriate for your age, the recklessness is in the not sprinting. The fibers that would catch you on the stairs are the fibers the decade of walking only allowed to atrophy. Hanging, the only daily spinal decompression under traction, the only sustained overhead range of motion maintenance, replaced by nothing. Carrying, the loaded diagonal kinetic chain maintaining grip, bone density, and the full muscle chain from fingers to contralateral ankle, replaced by wheels, handles, and carts. Climbing, the only vertical pull maintaining the latissimus, thoracic extensors, and overhead shoulder clearance, replaced by lifts, escalators, and flat floors. Ground rest operates through passive loading under gravity. The firm ground pressing against the thoracic kyphosis and gently extending it, hip flexors receiving a gravitational stretch they cannot get on a mattress that conforms to the existing posture. Suboccipital muscles releasing under skull weight instead of being held in tension by a pillow. 15 minutes on a firm floor delivers passive thoracic extension, psoas lengthening, and cervical release that 8 hours on a mattress does not. 5 maintenance signals, all absent, all simultaneously, for decades. And then Why the physics gets worse after 45? Because the body's ability to respond to the signals it does receive declines at the exact age when the signals it doesn't receive matter most. Mechanotransduction sensitivity declines with age. A load that produced a robust maintenance response at 30 produces a smaller response at 60. Integrin receptor density decreases, focal adhesion kinase signaling attenuates, and the downstream transcriptional cascade requires greater mechanical stimulus to achieve equivalent output. The body at 60 needs more mechanical variety to maintain tissues that the body at 30 maintained with less. This is not intuitive, it is the opposite of intuitive. Physics is the opposite of what most people assume. Common assumption: the aging body should do less, move carefully, reduce load, avoid intensity. Mechanotransduction physics: the aging body needs more diverse mechanical signals because each individual signal produces a weaker response. A 30-year-old body that walks, squats, and carries receives 3 strong maintenance signals. A 60-year-old body that only walks receives 1 weak signal. Weak because the sensitivity declined, and singular because the variety was eliminated. The decline in sensitivity and the decline in variety compound each other. Reducing movement variety at the age when sensitivity to each movement is declining accelerates the deprivation at the exact moment the body can least afford it. If you were told to take it easy, to walk gently, avoid squatting, stop lifting heavy things, never hang from anything, you are receiving advice that mechanotransduction physics contradicts directly. The body needed more input, not less. The maintenance pathways were understimulated, not worn out. And every year you followed that advice. Every year you walked gently and avoided load. The gap between what the body needed and what it received grew wider. Not because you failed to exercise, because the instructions were wrong. My door frame earned its hanging bar the day the imbibition physics arrived. 30 seconds of hanging before coffee, 60 seconds of squat hold after. Not for fitness. For the 5 maintenance signals the body spent all night without. Motor patterns for all 7 movements are encoded in your motor cortex. Squatting is a developmental movement pattern every human performs before age 2. Hanging is a grip and suspend pattern the upper limb was anatomically designed around. These patterns were built in and have been waiting unused for decades. Muscle responds to reintroduced load within the first session. Protein synthesis measurably increases within 4 hours of a novel resistance stimulus. The response is not diminished by age and direction. A 70-year-old muscle fiber that receives a resistance signal it has not encountered in decades upregulates protein synthesis with the same directional response as a 30-year-old fiber. The magnitude is smaller, the timeline is longer, but the pathway activates. The fiber was not waiting to die. It was waiting for the signal. Joint range responds to end range loading within the first week. The capsule stretches under sustained tension. Your synovial fluid responds as the thixotropic gel shears back into its flowing state, and the cartilage begins receiving imbibition across surfaces it was deprived of for decades. The hip that felt locked begins reporting a few degrees of new range, not from stretching the muscle but from feeding the cartilage and shearing the fluid that gelled in the ranges the chair never reached. Fascia remodels along new lines of mechanical stress within 2 to 4 weeks. The dense fibrotic tissue that formed in the absence of varied loading begins reorganizing along the vectors the new movements provide. Bone remodels in response to new loading vectors over 8 to 12 weeks. Osteoblasts depositing mineral along the lines of applied force through the canalicular mechanosensing pathway, osteocytes used to detect load. The bone that thickened along walking's compressive vector while thinning along every other vector begins rebuilding density in the directions the reintroduced movements demand. Days for muscle, weeks for fascia, months for bone, and 1 session is enough to begin. Start with the 3. The body misses most: the squat, the hang, and the carry. A 30-second squat hold against a wall, back sliding down, thighs approaching parallel, delivers end-range hip compression without requiring the balance or ankle mobility a full deep squat demands. Add depth gradually across weeks as your synovial fluid responds and the capsule loosens. The morning stiffness that eases after the first week is thixotropy responding to shear, the gelled synovial fluid returning to its flowing state through a range of motion, the walk to the kitchen never provided. By the second week, the squat depth increases, not from flexibility training but from the capsule receiving the end range signal it requires to maintain its length, and the cartilage feeding in zones that were nutritionally dark for decades. A 30-second passive hang from a door frame or pull-up bar, feet on the ground, partial body weight through the hands, delivers spinal traction and overhead range. A 2-minute loaded carry, a heavy bag in each hand, walking at normal pace, delivers the full diagonal kinetic chain from grip to contralateral ankle. The weight does not need to be extreme. Grocery bag weight is sufficient. The signal is in the sustained grip under load across distance, not in the magnitude of the load itself. 3 movements, 3 minutes, every morning. The tissues that have been waiting for decades begin responding from the first session. For anyone with joint replacements, active inflammatory arthritis, or acute disc herniation, discuss the specific movements with your physician before beginning. The principle of mechanical signaling applies, but the load parameters must be adapted to the joint's current capacity. 3 minutes tomorrow morning. 30 seconds hanging from the door frame. The vertical traction your spine has now received since childhood. 60 seconds in a squat hold. The end range compression your hip cartilage has been starved of for decades. The thixotropic shear your synovial fluid needs to flow. 2 minutes carrying something heavy in both hands. The diagonal kinetic chain that the Lyon data says predicts how long you live. 3 movements, 3 minutes. Every tissue begins responding from the first session, muscle synthesizing protein within hours, cartilage feeding through imbibition from the first compression cycle, motor patterns encoded before age 2, activating as if the decades of disuse were a pause, not an ending. And for 50 years, the instructions were, sit. Tomorrow morning, the instructions change.